Hi, everyone. I'm Shartia Brantley, Deputy New York Bureau Chief and Bloomberg Live Senior Editor. COVID 19 and its disproportionate impact on African Americans, as well as the recent unrest after the killing of George Floyd by four Minneapolis police officers, have laid bare the racial and economic inequalities that persist throughout the U.S. So, what can we do to close these economic gaps? Let's discuss with Ariel Investments founder, chairman, co CEO, and chief investment officer, John Rogers. Welcome, John.
It's good to be here.
Great. Thank you for joining us. John, before we dive into economic inequality, what is your take on the historical significance of the past few months from COVID to millions of job losses to the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and the protests that have followed?
Well, it's been an extraordinarily difficult, heartbreaking time. And, to see so many people lose their jobs, to see the markets collapse the way they did, it's just been remarkable. I think it must be very much like 1968 when we had all the horrible riots after Dr. King's death. And then, of course, when we got into what happened with Bobby Kennedy, and that whole year was just so extraordinarily, heartbreaking for our country. This is a similar type of a period for us. When you put together the COVID and the race issues, none of us are resting. None of us are relaxed. There's just stress everywhere.
Interesting similarities to 1968, a very hot year regarding the assassinations and unrest. But does this feel different in terms of any change that we may see from this? Will the change, is it fleeting or is it sustainable?
I'm hopeful this is going to be sustainable for a couple of reasons. I'm having lots of great conversations with many CEOs from companies that we've invested in to CEOs of the boards that I'm on and that Melody Hobson is on. And we're hearing that they're really serious about change and asking for advice, asking for counsel, and truly listening, which is something that is unique this time. The other thing that's really important, Congress right now is the most progressive Congress we've had in our nation's history. And we have people like Joyce Beatty chairing the subcommittee on diversity and inclusion for the Financial Services Committee. You have Maxine Waters chairing the Financial Services Committee. They both have excellent staffs, talented people. It gives me hope that they're going to be able to take this environment and change lives and change opportunities for African Americans from an economic justice perspective, because that's what often gets lost. Social justice is important, but it's tied also to economic justice.
Definitely. And let's talk about the wealth gap. So the median net worth of a white family is about 171,000. For a black family, it's about 17,000. So about a tenth for a black family, according to the Federal Reserve. What does multi-generational wealth and the role of multi-generational wealth, what role does that play in these numbers when we look at net worth?
Multi-generational wealth in this country. We've been going backwards the last 40 years or so. That is one of the key things that I think that people really don't understand, is how much worse it is for African Americans than we were 40 years ago. So we've got to figure out a way to make a dent in that problem. And the way that I think we have to do it is we have to have more Black business leaders in corporate America, but we also have to have more Black successful African American entrepreneurs. Because growing up here in Chicago, when we had George Johnson running Afro Sheen and Ultra Sheen, and John Johnson running Ebony and Jet magazine, they were role models for folks. They hired hundreds of thousands of people. They created enormous philanthropy for our community and political empowerment for our community. We have to go back. If we want to get multi-generational wealth, we've got to have more Black business leaders and more Black successful entrepreneurs of scale.
Do you attribute to the lack of Black executives in the C-suite? I mean, for example, we only have 4 Black men serving as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and not a single Black woman. So how do we begin to enter those spaces?
I think it's a couple of things. One, if you have successful African American business leaders and entrepreneurs, the next generation of Black business leaders will come along after them. It's interesting. George Johnson's son, Eric, runs the largest Black company in Chicago that's a supplier to McDonald's. So decisions that were made to create opportunities for entrepreneurs a generation ago have brought together a new generation of successful entrepreneurs. That's something that's important. But it's also critically important that we get African Americans who are on corporate boards and progressive leaders that are on corporate boards to hold their management teams accountable for diversity and inclusion. Tie it directly to their pay, have a Rooney rule when it comes to hiring, and make sure that when you're in that boardroom, you're confident and comfortable bringing up social justice and economic justice issues when you're in the boardroom. The civil rights agenda often gets left out if you're not courageous enough to go out and speak truth to power, and tell the leadership of these corporations that they have to live up to the commitments they've made around diversity and inclusion, not just talk a good game, but really execute.
Now, I know you've been very vocal about this, but is the onus on Black executives to be that voice on corporate boards when there are already so few of us on those corporate boards?
Well, it's just critical. We started a conference 17 years ago with my friend Charles Tribbett from Russell Reynolds, and Deloitte's become our partner. And this last year, we had 200 directors come together. We've had everyone from President Obama and Don Thompson to Jeff Immelt and Jamie Dimon, and from George Lucas to Shonda Rhimes. We've had just extraordinary people come and speak. But most importantly, every year we have what we call the conscience of the conference. Harry Belafonte, John Lewis, Andy Young, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Sharpton, people who actually have dedicated their lives to social justice and economic justice. And they're there to remind all of us that are fortunate to be in the boardroom of the sacrifices that went from prior generations who sacrificed their lives and risked everything to get these doors open for us. And the commitment that they expect of all of us to get in there and fight and fight and fight and speak up, even when you're the only one in the room, even when it's uncomfortable to do, when you see what kind of risk that John Lewis took, and getting his head bashed in, marching, we realize that we as African Americans on corporate boards have a responsibility to speak up and make a difference.
Mhm. So, according to the Alliance for Board Diversity, white women have been the biggest beneficiary when it comes to additional board seats. So, what can businesses and corporations do to ensure that their boards are more reflective of society? Why is it that, it's so much easier to champion gender diversity when it comes from a lot of our leaders instead of racial diversity? And why is race still that third rail in this country?
Well, I think race is the third rail because of the way that we came to this country. Is we know what's happened over the last 400 years. We've experienced the Jim Crow rules. We saw that whenever we get a little bit of progress, we get sort of knocked back again. My great grandfather had an extraordinary hotel in Tulsa that was burned down during the Tulsa race riots. So there's this long history where people have not been supportive of African Americans, that we've tried to move ahead and get ahead and bring our communities together in a positive way. There's a lot of studies that you're well aware of around implicit bias and unconscious bias. Too many of the programs talk about supplier diversity, and they think that African Americans can do only the construction, the catering, which are very important businesses, but not giving us an opportunity to participate in the parts of the economy where the wealth's being created today, in finance, in professional services, in technology. That's where the wealth and opportunity is. And those are the areas where we're the least involved and least included. And I think a lot of it is because of this unconscious bias and implicit bias that's still so much a part of our society. And we've got to fight it. We've got to change it. We've got to show people that once we're on the playing field, we're going to outperform. And as Reverend Jackson always says, baseball became a better sport once Jackie Robinson started playing and Ernie Banks and Willie Mays followed suit. Well, the same thing is happening with us here in business. Once we're allowed to get on the playing field, we'll show the world that we can deliver excellence in everything that we do. We have the talent and the gift and the depth to really make a difference for all of us. And
Now,
our country will be stronger because of that.
Definitely. You hit on implicit bias. What are some of the other factors, specifically within the financial services sector and technology and other professional services, that are preventing Black leaders from ascending to the C suite or even getting the funding if they've decided to venture on their own, also getting access to capital to fund these startups?
I think that, access to capital is helpful, but to make it in professional services or financial services, you need customers. I started my career as a stockbroker, a financial advisor at William Blair. I was the first African American professional to work there. And I pretty quickly noticed that all of my friends that were also stockbrokers and financial advisors, they had relationships, multi-generational relationships with people who live in the North Shore or the Western suburbs. They had aunts and uncles who were CFOs and CEOs and general counsels of big corporations. So they were able to bring in business, generate revenue, and grow their companies. Because of the segregation in Chicago, growing up in the South Side of Chicago like I did, I didn't have those kind of relationships. I didn't have dozens of people that I could call on to help generate revenue as I was making my way at William Blair. I saw the same thing with my mom. My mom was the first African American woman to graduate from the University of Chicago Law School. And she would get asked to serve on all types of boards, be involved in this and be involved in that, get an honorary degree here, get an honorary degree there. But when she would ask the same white men who wanted her in the boardroom, they'd say, I'd like to be your lawyer. I'd like to generate revenue by practicing law with my skills. They said, no, that's not the right thing. You should be comfortable just being in the boardroom. And that's still a challenge. We have to generate revenue. We need access to customers if we're going to build our businesses in professional services and financial services.
So, in that vein, then what are some of the steps? What is the role of the federal government in this? What is the role of prominent businesses and industries such as private equity to ensure that we're seeing more opportunities for people of color?
Well, if you think about it from the private equity standpoint, private equity success stories, they serve on all the boards around the country, corporate boards, university boards, hospital boards, nonprofit boards. They need to be able to say, if we want to have African Americans be successful, all these institutions that they're on the board of need to be doing business with Black businesses. That's a critical role that private equity people can do. They control hundreds of companies, control hundreds of boards. They can make a difference by fighting for us in that way. The other thing, when you bring up government, the federal government has large pools of assets. The PBGC, the National Railroad Trust, the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center. There's lots of places there where the federal government can push those institutions to do business with Black firms outside of just supplier diversity, to do it in what the University of Chicago calls business diversity and include us in everything they spend money on. And it's basically going back to the way things used to be when we had progressive mayors like Maynard Jackson in Atlanta, who's one of my heroes, Harold Washington here in Chicago, Coleman Young in Detroit. They not only insisted that Black businesses have a chance, but they also pushed all their professional services providers, their investment bankers, their lawyers, their accountants, to have Black partners on the relationships with the business that their respective cities were doing. If everyone did that, we would have a virtuous circle and we would all be able to rise together, all be on the playing field together, bringing our skills and talents to make our country and our cities stronger. So I often say we need to go back to the future and then again support the dynamic progressive leaders today that seem to be really getting it, like Congresswoman Beatty and others that I mentioned earlier.
hmm Now, you just talked about the purchasing P. You also discussed two other P's, people and philanthropy. Can you explain their role in also closing the economic gaps that we see today?
It goes without saying, and a lot of corporations are doing an excellent job of that. They're starting to understand that they need to give more of their philanthropic dollars to civil rights organizations that care about not only social justice, but economic justice. National Urban League, Rainbow Push, National Action Network, all of those giant organizations that make such a difference for our communities. So I think they're getting the philanthropy. On the people side, we just have to make sure that we're doing a much, much better job of holding managements accountable for the lack of diversity in the C-suite. And you have to tie compensation to it. There are some places that do a great job of that. Northern Trust Bank here in Chicago, Regions Bank. You have Exelon Corporation, McDonald's are doing an excellent job of really making sure that they're bringing diversity into the largest levels of their organization. So I know kind of my hometown who's doing it the best, and I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but we have to celebrate those companies and those leaders that are willing to make a difference. And then we have to challenge those that are not making a difference.
Now, before we go, I just want to touch back on Black Wall Street, and you mentioned your grandfather, J.B. Stratford. Um, can we recreate Black Wall Street today in this country, in today's economy?
I think we can. If we get our anchor institutions to celebrate Black business leaders and work with Black businesses, as I've been mentioning today in this interview. So if you think about it, just think of Tulsa. If all the anchor institutions in Tulsa made the commitment to work with Black businesses in Tulsa and work with the descendants of the Black Wall Street massacre, you would have large Black law firms, large Black accounting firms, consulting firms, advertising agencies, public relations firms, money management firms, private equity firms. You would have a virtuous circle of success. Every city can do that. If the anchor institutions, the corporate leaders, the hospitals, the museums, and the universities push everyone to do business with each other the way our progressive mayors used to 40 years ago. We can do it. We can do it together. We want to include everybody. And as Dr. King said, many white Americans of goodwill deplore prejudice, but they accept economic injustice. That's what we have to fight for. We have to fight for economic justice in our capitalist democracy here in this country.
Before we go, I just want to ask you personally, you talk about speaking out. Um, are you concerned that this could potentially impact inflows into your funds? That you've been so vocal about the disparities and what's happening in our society today.
Well, I think we at our firm, at Ariel, Melody and I believe deeply that we have a responsibility to fight this good fight. We've been very, very fortunate in our lives to be in the boardrooms, to be in these leadership roles, to see the amount of wealth that's created in professional services and financial services and technology. So we've been given this gift. We've been blessed to be in these boardrooms, in these leadership roles, and to see how our economy's evolved and realizing that our community has not been able to fully participate. And again, having heroes like Maynard Jackson and John Lewis, Bobby Kennedy, Dr. King, Reverend Jackson, and others, we have those kind of role models who took so much risk in their lives. It just is, for us, it's clear this is the right thing to do. And by being the first African-American money management and mutual fund company in the country's history, we think, again, we have a special responsibility to push these issues and get them out on the table and do it in a way that hopefully we can make a difference for our community.
Thank you so much, John. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time today.
This has been terrific. Thank you.